Bonjour, je m'appelle Adi et je suis le Skinhead Gourmet. Today I'm making entrecote or ribeye steaks. Boy, enjoy.
Woke up this morning with nothing to do. I've been hungover, but I'm in a good mood. I headed out with a buddy of mine. We started drinking about 10 past 9. Looked at the clock again, saw it's past noon. About the same time, realized I'm drunk too. I got some Z's and then it began. It was later that night, well I was drunk again.
So we're doing the ribeye steak, which is one of the most flavorful cuts from the beef cattle. It comes from between the 6th and 12th rib of the cow. And if you ever do buy your own sides or rib roast, which is a great way to save money as the price tends to be a lot lower than already trimmed beef, it's not hard to cut and you can trim it to basically the leanness that you desire. There should be a nice little fat marble going through it, but you don't want excess fat because you'll just end up with a greasy steak. And a lot of people know them besides ribeye as entrecote, and I know the Aussies and Kiwis like to call it a Scotch fillet. It's also known as a Delmonico steak. It's a very popular and traditional cut of steak, very, very easy to work with and very delicious. The first step, we're going to be making a French style, doing steak French style. I'm going to take some bacon lardons I've cut. We're going to get these into a screaming hot pan. We're going to want to get these guys cooked, and we're going to reserve that bacon fat to be used later on, because we're going to be basting the shit out of the steak. It's going to give it a beautiful, rich, deep flavor, and since we're cooking it in a saute pan, we don't want it to dry out too quick.
Without a jam, nothing planned for today is time to drink some beer. Just one of the stuff in life when nothing gets me down. The kitchen and the bottle.
Well, we've got our bacon rendering down and giving us some bacon fat to work with later on. I'm going to take my steaks, I've already got them trimmed, ready to go. I'm going to just season them. All we're going to be putting on these guys is salt and pepper. If you do have fresh cracked pepper, I would highly recommend it. Sometimes it's a luxury that I can't always afford, so we do have to go with the pre-ground stuff. It's still going to work, it's still going to give us the flavor we want. You're going to want to rub that in and get that massaged into the steak a little bit. You don't want to kill it with either, but this is going to help bring a lot of the flavors that are in the steak out to the surface. So you can see we've got our bacon nicely cooked. We've got some crispy lardons. What we want to do is, and throughout the process I've been trying to separate the fat that I've rendered down so it's separate, because we're going to need these for two different applications. Now, far be it for me to ever waste bacon of any sort. So we're going to take this, we're going to put it aside, because we can use this to top, garnish, and add a little extra something to the steak once it's done. But what's really important, the star of the show right now, is going to be that bacon fat. We're going to want to keep this pan hot, because we're going to want this screaming hot before we even let the steaks get into it. Ideally, you're going to want a pan that's about 500 degrees to get a perfect sear. We might not be able to achieve this with your regular home stove, but we're going to try to get it as close as possible. So we've got our pan screaming hot. We're going to take a nice big hunk of butter and some of our bacon fat. Not all. We don't want to blow our wad right away. We're going to want to get this in the pan, get these two starting to melt. We're going to take our little entrecotes and make sure we get it down in that bacon, and then flip it over. And we're going to get this to start cooking. Now for these steaks, we're not going to be cooking them for very long. We're going to want to make sure we keep them nice and buttered up. Part of the French method of cooking a steak is to baste and just make rich and indulge. And this is why we also wanted to reserve a little bit of our bacon fat and get this on top all throughout the cooking process. You also don't want to continually flip the steaks. So after it's been in for about 2, maybe 2.5 minutes on one side, and you'll feel it starts to firm up a little bit, will be when you finally want to flip it. You don't want to flip it more than once for each side. You don't want to make it cook unevenly. You don't want to be tossing it around and having it lose all of its delicious, precious juices. Alright, so it's been about 2.5 minutes. I'm going to flip these guys over. As you can see, we've got a nice little sear. It's brown with some dark brown. That dark brown is actually a caramelization of the sugars in the meat, as well as the myoglobin in the meat, not the hemoglobin, but the myoglobin has iron in it. And by heating it up, you're putting it into a trivalent ferric state, which means you're basically knocking electrons off of it, and that's what changes the color from red to brown. So now that we have this down, you can start feeling it. If you cook for long enough, you'll know it by touch. But you can also use a meat thermometer. And we're going to be shooting on these guys for about 125 degrees. Because I like mine about medium rare. And it's going to be resting for a minute, which will make it, it'll continue cooking once it's out of the pan on residual heat.
It's been a while, looking back on the days they always think small. No worries, just glory and not in a flies. Good up, go on, great, and get it drunk twice. I got drunk today, I got drunk twice. I got drunk today, I got drunk twice. I got drunk today, I got drunk twice. I got drunk today.
So these guys are getting close to finished cooking, so I'm going to add a little extra last bit of butter. What we're actually going to do is take some of our red wine. It's going to get a little bit on the steak, but really what we're doing is we want to deglaze the pan. We're going to want to get all the drippings that are in there re-moistened because we're going to make a pan sauce. So these steaks are at about 125, which would be rare. We're going to remove these from heat and let them rest. The residual heat will continue cooking them up a little bit more to about maybe 130, 135, which would be considered a medium rare, which is about where I like my steak. Unless it's a nice cut of A5 Kobe or something exceptionally fancy, you don't really want it a whole lot more cooked than that. For something very good, you can go a little bit less. This is an okay ribeye. Mid-rare sounds good. But we're going to let our red wine keep going. We're going to get more butter into this. And we're going to go back and add a little bit of our bacon, as well as some of our Fiend's herbs mix, which is a little bit of parsley, chive, and thyme. And a couple little shreds of those lardons. And we're just going to want to get this kind of mixed together. This is what we're going to be topping our steak with, as well as any sides that we're serving with it.
Keep on drinking down. Keep on drinking down.
I've got a pot, I'm putting a little, that's already hot, I've got some butter into it, and I have some Brussels sprouts that I've already cleaned, halved, and I've parboiled or blanched. You're just going to want to barely cook them a little bit, but you'll get a nice green color out of them. We're going to put these guys in here with some butter, swirl them in the butter to get them nicely coated. We're not going to want to cook these guys too much. We're going to take a little bit of lemon juice. It's going to help bring out the flavor of those Brussels sprouts beautifully, as well as complement them. A little bit of salt and pepper, and a nice pinch of our Fiend's herb mix. And toss that around. And I've got a diced small tomato. We're going to put this in. We're not letting this cook for very long, so we don't have to worry about the tomato dying in the pan on us. But this will complement our steak nicely, and it'll take the sauce that we're going to put on it well. So our Brussels sprouts are about done. So I'm going to slice my steak into 3 sections just for service. One of the nice things about it is it'll stop the cooking process, but you can also use it to show the doneness of your meat. Still nice, a little bit of red in the middle, mostly pink. You can also stack it up into 3 pieces, which is a little bit more artful than just throwing a slab of meat onto a plate. Sprouts are about done, so I'm going to pop my lardons that we used earlier in there, mix them in. We're going to take these and put them right on the plate. We just kind of want to toss the bacon in there just to kind of warm it up a tiny little bit. So I've let the pan sauce reduce a little bit. I'm not a fan of a thick, heavy sauce, which I know is more of a traditional French thing. But we're going to just take some of it, and we're going to top our steak with that, as well as a little bit onto our Brussels sprout. Now with steak, one thing you're always going to want, that's a big deal, is temperature. With a super high quality cut of meat, you may want to do Pittsburgh or black and blue, or blue as it's known, which basically means an internal temperature of about 115 degrees. Usually about the coolest that most people will go for is rare, which will be about 115 to 120 degrees, sometimes as high as 125. I'm a personal fan of medium rare, which is anywhere between 130 and 140. There's medium, which is 140 degrees to 150, and then you basically have mid-well and well, which would be 150 up. Basically, once you hit 150, you've killed your piece of meat. Anything above that really doesn't matter. Now, here in the States, the USDA recommends all beef is cooked to a temperature of about 145 degrees or more. That's your choice. If you do want to cook it a little bit less, you're going to maintain a lot more of the flavor. It's much like fish. The more you cook it, the less flavor it's going to have. You kill it with temperature. An easy way to tell your temps, the more familiar you are with it, you can touch it and you'll get an idea as to the texture. There's a different firmness as temperature goes along. You can always use a meat thermometer, but every time you poke the meat, you run the risk of opening it up and letting juice come out and dehydrating your meat and making for a less juicy piece of steak. It's a great way to destroy a beautiful, beautiful piece of meat. So we've got our ribeye cooked with our little reduced sauce on top, our tomato Brussels sprout mix. I've also got some homemade pommes frites and our cucumber and tomato salad. We've got a nice looking little plate. It's going to be full of a variety of flavors. It's going to be delicious. It's surprisingly quick and easy to make. Hope you enjoy. My name's Eddie, the Skinhead Gourmet. Oi, enjoy. Bon appetit. Now before the hate mail starts rolling in about the sauce I used on the steak, I understand full well that typically in French cooking I should have taken my pan drippings and my red wine sauce and I should have reduced it down au sec and then slowly incorporated cold butter with a whip, almost as though I were making a beurre blanc, making it thick and have a heavy, rich sauce that was going to coat the steak. What I was going for was to basically reduce it down to the barest, most essential of flavors, using that partially cooked lardons to soak everything up. So I wanted it concentrated, I wanted to be able to pile it up without really drowning the steak. It's a nice cut of meat that doesn't need to be covered in sauce. Now, I understand in some parts of the world that beef aging isn't as prevalent as in the U.S., and we do have our beef aged a little bit more. I want to taste the beef flavor. This is also why it gets cooked au point, or mid-rare as we know it here. I wanted to clear that up. This is why it came out the way it did instead of a thick, rich, hearty sauce like many would be expecting if I was doing a French-style steak. Just wanted to clear that up and save you guys some emails. Thanks again, and boy, thanks for watching.
Without a cap, nothing planned for today. It's time to drink some beer. No more rage, just glory and not in a flash. Good old gold friendship beginning strong smiles. I got drunk today, I got drunk twice. I got drunk today, I got drunk twice. I got drunk today, I got drunk twice. I got drunk today, drunk twice. Just keep on drinking, yeah. Just keep on drinking, yeah. Just keep on drinking, yeah. Just keep on drinking.